Hey, welcome to this Geography Masterclass. Today we're going to learn about impacts on mountains, specifically looking at living in the mountains and working in the mountains. My name is Mr. Salagaras and this is part of my Year 8 Geography course. So, living in the mountains has obvious impacts. The two we're going to focus on are isolation and access and environmental conditions. Living in the mountains can make it very difficult for people to travel to and from cities and towns because they don't have infrastructure such as transport, so roads, trains, airports, all that sort of thing. So that makes it really difficult for people living in those areas to get access to resources such as food and medicine, but also makes it difficult for them to be able to sell goods and crops and all that sort of thing for a livelihood. We could talk about that a lot more, but let's just stay really brief on that one. The environmental conditions. So living in a high altitude place means that people get less oxygen. So there's less oxygen the higher you go above sea level. So that affects the people living there, particularly visitors to those regions. The other environmental conditions are things like snow, flooding, avalanches, but also just the temperature of those places. So having lots of months of the year that are particularly cold or regions that are really covered in snow make it very difficult for the people in those areas to live and also make an income. Okay, so let's now talk about working in the mountains. So farming in the mountains is going to be our focus today. It has both pros and cons. So we're both talking now about cattle farming and also crop farming. I'm going to talk about cons first. So crop farming in mountainous regions can have some problems, such as like getting access to the grain you need to grow the crops, but also it's difficult to transport your crops to be able to sell them to get money and an income. There's also problems with climatic conditions and environmental conditions such as snowfall, which affects the ability of crops to grow, but also affects cattle as well, because if you've got snowfall for a long period of time, that's going to mean there's areas of your cattle grazing area that the cattle can't eat because the snow is covering the grass. Let's talk about some of the pros. Living in high altitude communities such as mountains provide fertile soil and regular rainfall for crops to grow and for cattle to graze on. In Australia, there's a lot of cultural significance to this because cattle farmers have been grazing their cattle in the snowy mountains and the region in Victoria and New South Wales for generations. They've been grazing their cattle in those regions because there's lots of fertile soil, there's lots of vegetation for the cattle to feed on. There's both arguments for and against this because people are saying that the cattle grazing on these areas reduces the risk of bushfires because they're eating the vegetation, but other people are saying that the damage that the cattle cause through eating the vegetation and also by eroding the soil is a negative thing. So there are both pros and cons to farming in mountainous areas. Let's just summarize the main points that we talked about. Living in mountainous areas has its set of impacts such as isolation and access, but also those environmental conditions. And working in mountains has its pros and cons as well. Thanks for watching this video. Make sure you like it and subscribe to my channel, add comments, and most importantly, watch it again if there's a point that you missed. Thanks for watching.